Hello, everyone. Welcome to my new episode of Digitalization of Utilities. And today's topic is a very interesting. How do we use robots in utilities? And especially, how do we use Spot, one of the robots that IBM and Boston Dynamics, and how do we use it in utilities? Talking on this, we have a special guest today, Victor Sanchez. Victor is a CTO of Connected Edge and Digital Twin Center of Competency at IBM. I'm very excited to record this particular session because it involves robots and really cool things. Victor, welcome to my show.
Thank you very much, Ninat. And I'm very excited myself to be here because I think this is a very interesting subject, and I'm very passionate about the whole robotics and human machine teaming and how it can be made into real solutions, not just hype or buzz.
And not just what we see in the movies.
Exactly. We are not going to be taking over Skynets, but we need to be careful with how we use robotics as well.
Certainly, certainly. So on that note, Victor, why do you think robots are important for modern utilities?
Yeah, well, I think that mainly they are important for three things. Is there are certain jobs that as humans we find either too dull, too dirty, or too dangerous. And I think that those type of jobs are the jobs that robots can do better than us. For example, too dull is if you have to go through a plant and start checking gauges in the plant for different manometers. That's too dull. You have to go and fill the information in a paper. That's too dull. Dangerous, there are areas where you don't want to have a person because it's a dangerous environment because either the chemicals there or power there. So that's also something that you don't want to have a human. And dirty, as the name says, I mean, if you might not want to get too dirty, might not want to get too, so send a robot, they don't care. So those is what I think that it's very important in general, but specifically for utilities is because we see that utilities, many of the assets or many of the locations have been already there for 20, 30 years. So it's very aging infrastructure. So it's not something that you can easily connect or easily get the data from there. So that's why I think it is very important for utilities.
Mm-hmm. So when we talk about robots, how would you define robot, and what are the different types of robots that are currently being used in utility sector?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that because it's like quite often when I start talking about robots, actually I try to talk about machine as human machine teaming. And why is this? Because it's robots now is a very broadly dropped word, and you have manufacturing robots that they are fixed robots, but you also have robots like Spot that you could call cobots, like collaboration robots, that they work together with humans. But you also have another set of robots that they are semi-autonomous robots or autonomous roaming sensor platforms that they are just moving around with sensors without any specific. So it is a very broad term, robots. In principle, the way I see robots is more like sensor platforms, is like new ways of obtaining data and interacting with the real world that doesn't involve humans.
When we talk about utilities, what sort of robots would be used in utilities?
Yeah, I think that there are two specific ones. I mean, the cobots, the collaboration robots, that they are going to facilitate the investigation of plants, of aging infrastructure, systems that they are not connected. So these collaboration robots, like Spot, they are the perfect example. Now, the other ones that I see is semi-autonomous drones. They're not, some people wouldn't consider them robots, but you can make semi-autonomous drones that they follow a same pattern of flight. And I think those might be very interesting for other utilities also, because they cover a big geography, they can fly and also with the photographies that they take, they can cover big spaces. And of course, there are some regulations there about the flight, especially around electrical high power lines and things like that. But still, I think those two areas, so the cobots, like spots and drones, carefully, and those are the two most specific solutions that I see for utilities.
Okay. Yeah, and I think the start of last year or mid of last year, I was involved in a consulting engagement on using drones for solar farm. And if you consider 100, 200, 300 megawatt plants, they're spread across acres and acres of land. And how do we get the thermal images, RGB images, how do we process those images? When you start getting in mode of using robots into utilities, there are a lot of things that we can consider, how long it can fly and all those things. So one parallel question that comes to mind, and because you specifically work very close to Spot, right?
Yes.
So what can Spot do, and what sort of payloads can Spot carry? And before that, if it's easy for you to show our viewers what exactly Spot looks like, and it's a really interesting
Yes.
device.
So let me take in the question. So let me first show you a video that you can find in YouTube. Let me open it here. Okay. So I hope you can see it now.
Yeah.
So you can find this in YouTube. So I will not talk a couple of seconds. So what I like already of this video is already it shows some of the capabilities, and where we were talking is the capability of working in very difficult environments or dangerous environments. So working in a very kind of a very uneven part, the fact that a Spot can carry different payloads. I always say, and Boston Dynamics, I love you. I'm a robotics geek, but the way I define sometimes a Spot is like a computer with legs.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, it's a sensor platform. So the idea is would actually Spot connect different payloads, and you could already see some of those payloads here, mainly this one that is the camera, but that can be a LiDAR camera, it can be a normal camera, infrared camera. But besides the Boston Dynamics, you can add any payload you might think of it. So that's one of the good things of a Spot. It has a way of connecting basically USB connections. I mean, it's a bit more complicated than that, but not much more. And so it gives you the flexibility of thinking, what data do I need? Can this cobot help me on getting this data to solve this problem? So as you can see, cobot is of the generation of quadruped robots. You see a lot of other companies, but with a couple of exceptions, most of the quadruped robots that you see around, they are not ready for industrial use. They are mainly for universities or investigation. So you were talking also about the duration. I mean, we are not talking here about hours and hours of independence, but you need to think that it's self-sufficient. So you can program the journeys or the walks of a Spot, and automatically will go to power up stations, to reload the stations on its own. So when you are talking on the plants, I would not worry too much about the time. I think right now it's around 90 minutes or 2 hours. but I think it should never be something that you would say, hey, this is a showstopper for me. You are not sending them in a mission on the field mission for 3 days. You are sending them in short missions that they are looking into doing a short walk in the factory or in the plant, and then you set up different charging stations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then will the duration depend on the payload that it's carrying and the use case that we are expecting Spot to do?
Well, yes, but not massively. I mean, of course, Spot has an arm to interact. It depends of what you're doing with that arm and also the weight of the payload. That will have an impact on the Spot. But I would not say that is a massive one. Especially, I would not use, let me go back. I would say that the more you interact with the environment, the more power it will consume. So just having some sensors will not have much of a power impact. Having a camera, because it's heavier and because you need more power to analyze the images, it might have a bit. Having an arm that you need to interact, you need to lift things maybe. Yes, that might have more consumption, but still not so much. And I would not recommend to use this cobot for real interaction. I don't think that we are yet in that moment that unless very specific use cases like switching switches that they are dangerous, that they could be electrical problems or something, except some very safety related use cases, I would not use this type of arms. So I don't think that that's a big concern or problem.
Okay. So how do you help clients to build these use cases? Is there any methodology that you use? Because this is a very specific use cases and very niche use cases you're talking about.
So yes, I'm going to open another presentation that I have. That this is how I start usually my presentations to customers. Let me quickly. So this is a photo I took in our London center, so where we have a Spot. So I'm pretty sure I can use this photo because it comes from my mobile. So here the question, what is a Spot? And well, basically Spot can be the next generation of maintenance robots, a Boston Dynamic Spot robot, a roaming sensor platform with multiple payload capabilities, a cool gadget that organizations buy and don't know what to do with it, all of the above. Yeah, and here is the first thing is where the answer, by the way, is all of the above. I see that quite often is like, we don't know really how to use a Spot. They just say, oh, we want a Spot. So I will always start with why. Why do you want a Spot? Think first about the problem. Think first about what current problem am I going to solve with a Spot? Because that's also going to direct you to what type of payload do you need to have a Spot with. And then start with that. Don't start with, oh, we just want a Spot and we just want to play around. Because it is not an easy thing to play around. In the sense that it has so many capabilities that you might be overwhelmed. Focus on the business. So that's the way I would say, and in this methodology, the way we approach the using of a Spot is by focusing on the why, this is your problem, this is how the Spot could help you. We go back to the dull, dirty of dangerous. It's like, what are the work that is too dull, too dirty, too dangerous to be done by a human? So this is the whole point. But in summary, after long talk, what I would say is focus on the current business problem. Make sure that you involve also the stakeholders and the users, and think before you buy.
Okay. So are there any sort of design thinking workshops that you do once you narrow down on one specific challenge, say dangerous situation that we need to avoid? What sort of...
Well, it's not so much as, design thinking. It's the world the sky is the limit. The world is your oyster. Just think broadly. So what we do in our design thinking workshops is actually kind of a bit restrict. We set boundaries. So we initially, before we start with any design thinking, what we do is have a session we call a co-ideation session with the customer and with the key stakeholders and key users to learn more about what are their pains, what are their problems, finding the why, but also finding a vision of the future. And that is not just for a spot, is what do you see your organization doing in X years? Very normal question that every consultant has in his top 10. But in this case, we use it to scope and set boundaries when we are doing the design thinking. So our facilitators during that design thinking, they will give us more nudges to make sure that we don't go into crazy solutions. So we don't try so much as create a new methodology or create things that they are completely new, as adapt the ones that we already have to get to that objective that we want.
Can you give one simple example where you have used Spot in utility? Is there an example that you can share?
There are a couple of examples. I cannot share the name of the company, but there are a couple of examples. One of them is in a grid. Basically, what they need is inspection of their sites. So what they needed is inspection to have a spot with walking around a camera in a predefined path. It will check for some very specific possible damages or possible problems. Rust is one of them. If there is any kind of damage in some infrastructure, it could be a tower. So that was one. But additionally, and in the same trip, same journey, the Spot will take photos of some manometers, of some gauges. So it will be able to create the readout, and in this case, it was for pressure and to a margin of 1 psi. So it will, with the accuracy of 1 psi in the gauge, it will manage to read it. So this is an example, and this is something that quite often customers come with. So I would say is asset inspection, and I would say is kind of sensors or putting sensoring over old machines, over legacy machines that you don't know and you need to send somebody to write out the number.
Okay. You touched upon a couple of data sets that Spot can capture. One is images. What are other type of data sets or data assets that Spot can capture?
Yeah, data images is one of the key ones and one of the first ones, but also you need to think that it's not just the traditional image. You also have infrared, very useful if you want to check if some machine or some asset is too hot, because a Spot can actually do already processing on the edge. So we'll, by looking at it, immediately we'll be able to detect this is too hot, I need to send an alarm. So that's another aspect that, although it's still camera-based, is very useful. LiDAR as well, although LiDAR you will use it more for the representation of the space and create point clouds later. It also has some use. So what we see now is a lot about chemical detection. Especially when we are talking about the dangerous part, and with a safety focus is to detect leaks of dangerous gases, to detect the levels of contaminants in specific areas or specific locations. So those are some things that we see quite often. There are others, and of course, besides the Boston Dynamics native sensors, you have other organizations that they made their own sensors. But I would say these are the main ones, the most relevant ones.
Okay. Once the Spot starts capturing the required data, can it be integrated with the other system in the organization, say the EM system, to create a work order, for example?
Definitely. And this is what organizations should look from day one. What we see quite often is the start kind of proof of concept with organizations that have a Spot and then very specific use case. And yes, they might get some results on that use case, but they are not thinking about how to integrate that data. So as I say at the beginning is when you start with your business problem, when you start with your current challenge, you also need to start thinking about how this data is going to help in my organization, in my enterprise. No, so again, do not think about the Spot as a standalone thing. Think Spot about a new way of obtaining data to help you. Because in a few years, what we are going to see is fleets of robots, cobots, drones, all obtaining data in different ways, but at the end, feeding your organization. So it's the key of it. I mean, a Spot on its own, very interesting, but the key of a Spot is to get data that you can integrate with your organization data and your enterprise data.
Okay. I'm a bit curious on this photo over here that you're sharing. Behind Spot, you see a panel with monitors. It's a bit blurred, but then is that a control center for the robot?
Yes, indeed. That's a control center for the robot. In this case, the robot does 2 or 3 things in this demo. One of them is checking that fire extinguishers are according to regulations. So one of the demos that we do is the Spot goes around checking and if the extinguisher has the mandatory review on the right date. It checks if it's not well position or if there is some obstacle. So this is one of the examples. It's quite an interesting thing because also gives you access to the camera, to the video, because you can receive it real time. Besides the processing of data on edge, can send the same data real time depending on your connectivity. So that's also the importance of a Spot, that you could even have one control center, not just for one Spot, but for many spots. So we will see even new jobs coming out, like a robot handler, you could call it. That basically is the one that manages all the robots or all the cobots in a plant or in a number of plants.
So how far should that control center be when you're operating a robot or Spot in this case?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. My answer would be depends, in the sense that if you are, and this is a bit counterintuitive, if you are in a relatively close environment, you don't need to be too close. If you set up a Spot to be doing the rounds for either safety or for other solutions in a plant or a factory, I would say you don't need to be too close. Close enough so you can help if there is kind of a problem, although it's pretty self-sufficient.
Okay.
But if, for example, what you do have is you need to deploy a Spot in multiple locations, then yes, you need a handler that is the one that maybe set up the robot to initiate the walk in always the same position. You don't need per se a handler to drive the robot. As I say, it has an auto walk, and it would be my recommendation to use as much as possible. But I would say that it has to do with how well known is the environment.
Okay.
So the more known it is, the farther you can be. But if you need, especially when you need to position a Spot in multiple locations, then I would say you need the control center to be a close handler.
Okay. When I was working on the drone use case, one use case that we were talking about is during the maintenance schedule, can we train the drone to fly to a certain defined path, and then it takes the photos, it comes back to its nest, and we know how and when it should go and take those photos, upload the photos, we process the photos, and then we do all the maintenance activity. Can Spot do the same thing, sort of automated task?
Absolutely. And this is the key of it. It's a Spot not as a tool to do one thing, but that's actually the benefit, is you can program to do many things either at the same time or at different points of time. Using the example of the camera, you can have a Spot in the mornings doing a defined route to check all the fire extinguishers in your plant to make sure that they are all okay, come back, recharge, and then go and, without changing anything in the spot, in the camera or anything, you can have it to check if there is any kind of infrastructure damage.
Okay.
And then come back, recharge, and go back and do the same with reading gadgets, or do all these things at the same time. My personal advice is I wouldn't mix what we call missions, but I would separate the missions to make it more clear. But you can have either multi-mission robot. It's not a one single mission that it can do this and that's all. And it all depends of how you think the solutions. You need to program and create this and deploy it. So you need to think also new ways of managing your fleet of robots. It's a bit different than we've seen till now, that in edge technology, where edge is pretty static in the sense that you will not change edge devices often, just when you change some firmware. With a spot, you might even change several times a week or a day. It depends of the characteristics of the payload.
Okay. So how do you usually scale, say, for example, a small MVP that you have done, say, for example, one mission to multiple missions?
So again, it's a matter of finding is like, what are the type of problems that the spot can fix that will otherwise you won't be able to, and then create a backlog of it. We are in the world of agile backlogs, and then start implementing, but always making sure that you also look into the how to integrate that data, so it has also a broader use. And that's the how from the business point of view. On the how from the more technical, when you have one robot, one spot, it's pretty easy, to manage. In the moment you start having a fleet, you need to think also about your robot fleet management. Which robot is doing what, when, or which missions are you loading on the robot? As I say, you can either have a multi-mission robot or you can have a single mission robot. Depends of how heavy are the missions, how difficult they are in programming terms. So you need to think, and this is one of the key elements of moving from MVP to real solutions. You need to think about how to operate. Quite often we think about how to solve a problem, but not about how to operate that as an ongoing solution. That's the key. And that includes elements of operations of the robot, security of the data, maintenance of the robot. It becomes a new asset in your industry. The only thing is, it could be that you only need 5 robots. So the maintenance is fairly simple. So those are the things.
Okay. Now, you talked about the limitations that are from moving from MVP to a bigger multi-mission, multi-fleet robot. But are there any other limitations or roadblockers that you encounter from the benefit side of business?
Well, there are a couple of them. One of them is the human that is afraid of losing their job. That's why I would never put spot as a either or. And I always talk about human-machine teaming. For me, is the robot needs to make the job easier, not substitute somebody's job. So this is one of the biggest hurdles, the fact that it's like, robot. The moment you think robot, everybody's thinking Terminator.
Yeah.
So everything in Skynet and Terminator. There are other technological hurdles. As I say, security is usually is like the data. How do you move that data? And is that data needs to be protected for multiple reasons. And the other one is around regulations about the environment. For example, if you are working on a ATEX 0 environment, highly volatile, you might not be able to go with the normal spot. You might need to do some things because it might not be ATEX 0 certified. I would say that the biggest hurdles, usually they are not technological. The biggest hurdles are either organization or human.
Okay. That's interesting perspective, yeah. And usually human get scared when it comes to robotics because first is the fear of losing the job. That's for everyone.
Yeah, actually, that's one of the things when I talk about robots and human
Mhm.
machine teaming, I talk about the needs that you might have in robotics. So I talk about the ingredients and the ingredients of a human machine teaming. I talk about certain ingredients that they are necessary for the creation of solutions. So you need to think also, and as I say, security is one of them, mission control that we were talking, connectivity, integration, but the key question is trust. The key ingredient is trust. So I always put Terminator. I'm a child of the 80s. So for me, the robot means Terminator. And that's one of the things that you need to look into, how to engage, how to make sure that there is trust by the organization, by the users. And as I say, it's focused on the human element, that there is transparency, that you understand what the robot is doing. That is repeatable. That's one of the key things. So all this trust is this ingredient when it comes to using robots. Not sure if I have answered the question, if I've gone in a very philosophical path.
That's very important that you touched on the right point. So one question then always comes to my mind is, at this point of time in our initial phase of using robots in utilities, how cost effective is it? And how should organization look at Spot or robot, for example, from the cost benefit analysis?
Yeah.
Will it be cheaper, or how do you even justify the cost if it's higher?
Well, at the beginning, when we were talking about the business case, also think about the cost effectiveness. And it depends on which one of the Ds are you addressing. If you are looking into dangerous, your cost effectiveness might be that, look, if you are going to have a person that needs to flip a switch, and that switch can be dangerous, like it was the case in one of our customers, human life doesn't have a price. There is no return of investment. You just don't want to have somebody injured or dead because of something that happened at work. So when it comes to the dangerous, the safety part, the business case is quite straightforward. What I will never think it's a good use case is if you go with the mindset of, oh, if I have a robot, I'm going to reduce 10 people in my workforce because the robot will do the job of 10 people. That is definitely not a good use case. Besides, is unethical. You will have a lot of problems with unions and similars. And we've never seen now instead of people, I have a robot being a good use case.
Okay. Interesting. I have one last question to all my guests over here. What does digitalization of utilities mean to you?
Digitalization of utilities. Well, for me, is the capability of making sure you can operate your utility organization basically using data. So I would say three parts of it. For me, the digitization, it would be assemble the right type of data, analyzing that data with the appropriate technology, and act accordingly to the findings. So this assemble, analyze, and act, this is what for me is the digitization of utilities. So if you do these three things, you are in a good digitalization path.
That's a nice definition. Thank you very much. Okay, Victor, this is something interesting topic, and we can keep talking about it for hours and hours.
Hours and hours. I mean, I'm passionate about this. My friends in college, I studied computer science engineer, and they used to joke because I study AI and robotics, and they were telling me like, you really want to build a Skynet and Terminator? And I was like, hell yeah.
The good Terminator, yeah?
Yeah. So, yeah, good that I didn't follow that path. I went into becoming a consultant, but I could talk for hours about this.
Okay, yeah, that's nice. So thank you, Victor, for taking out time, and thank you for coming on my show. It was a big pleasure to talk to you about a very interesting topic that you are very passionate about.
Yeah. Thank you for the invitation. Really appreciate it and really appreciated the opportunity. So thanks a lot, Ninat.
Thank you